Hey guys, what's up? So, since I reviewed Star Wars episodes 1 through 6 and didn't get a chance to review episodes 7, 8, and 9, I figured I might as well review them now, starting with what, in my opinion, is the best movie in the saga since episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, The Last Jedi. And just like my reviews of episodes 1 through 6, we're going to go over a brief summary of the plot, then my pros and cons, and then, of course, my conclusion. Alright? So let's get started. So, as you know, The Last Jedi picks up right where The Force Awakens left off after Rey has found Luke Skywalker hiding on the island planet of Ahch-To. Meanwhile, the Resistance is attempting to escape their base when the First Order fleet arrives and destroys the base, and they're forced to relocate. From there, the movie turns into a slow chase after the First Order tracks the Resistance through Lightspeed, while Finn and Rose have to go on a side mission to find a code breaker to sneak them onto Supreme Leader Snoke's Star Destroyer. And while Rey is trying to learn from Luke, she and Kylo Ren develop a really strong connection through the Force. And before I get into my pros, I just want to preface the review by saying, yes, I will discuss the controversy and the division and the love-hate relationship that the fanbase has with this movie, but not until the end of my review. So let's start with the pros. Now, the biggest pro and greatest compliment I can give this movie is the fact that it was so drastically different than I expected. The fact that it didn't meet a single one of my expectations, but most importantly, the fact that it had the guts to break away from the Star Wars formula and also had the guts to, I think, raise a lot of thought-provoking questions and ideas about the previous movies as well as Star Wars in general. For example, unlike The Force Awakens, this movie has very few similarities to the others. Granted, there are obvious similarities specifically to Empire Strikes Back, with Luke and Rey training just like Luke and Yoda did, the main character having a vision in a dark side cave, the villain attempting to turn the hero to the dark side. Those are some of the most obvious, both visual and story similarities. But as a whole, I love that this movie decided to have way less similarities than the others and really tried to do its own thing. And I think that's mainly due to the fact that Rian Johnson was an independent director before being hired to write and direct The Last Jedi. He had absolutely no experience with blockbusters or science fiction, fantasy, action movies. Before The Last Jedi, he had only done 3 or 4 smaller movies, most of them, not super popular and well known, except for, say, Looper. And, just like Irvin Kershner, who directed Empire Strikes Back, Johnson was a complete outsider before being hired to direct this movie. But I think that worked to both Last Jedi and Empire Strikes Back's benefit because you had 2 different directors who both had no experience in the, big studio blockbuster world, and their outside perspective helped make both of their respective sequels drastically different than their predecessors, and thus better than the previous movies in the trilogies that they were a part of. Now, my second biggest pro with The Last Jedi is, of course, the most controversial point surrounding it, but one that I don't see as controversial, but I think was just made into a controversy because it didn't meet the expectations of the fans, and that is Luke. He is easily the best part of this entire movie. And I don't care what people say that he was ruined or assassinated or tarnished by this movie. His arc and his storyline in this movie is so fascinating and so dramatic and heartbreaking and pleasantly surprised me. I like majority of the fans just expected him to, come back instantly and kick Kylo's ass in a lightsaber fight and, be the selfless, heroic guy we remember and grew up with from the original trilogy. But the fact that he wasn't, I think, is one of The Last Jedi's strongest points. And I'll explain why. First of all, what is one of the main themes of The Last Jedi? Failure. Rey fails to turn Kylo Ren back to the light side because she naively thinks there's still good in him after their Force connection, and the fact that he listens to her because they're going through the same situation. They're both trying to find their meaning and purpose and sense of belonging in this whole war, and because of that, they start to relate to each other and kind of have this sense of mutual understanding that's not romantic, but they start to understand and see each other's point of view because really they're essentially the same character, just on different sides. Finn and Rose fail to get the Master Codebreaker to help them break onto Snoke's Star Destroyer and are forced to go with DJ, who isn't the Master Codebreaker, but still helps them get onto the Star Destroyer, but eventually betrays them. Poe destroys the Dreadnought and ends up being demoted by Leia and gets the entire bombing fleet killed, even though he didn't intend to, which goes along with the realistic idea that even though your actions can have good intentions, there can be serious consequences to them. And the complaint that Poe disobeyed Leia's orders and that he shouldn't have, I think, is stupid because it was the right thing to do. Because if he didn't destroy the Dreadnought, the entire Resistance would have been wiped out in the opening scene. And Luke fails the most because with one knee-jerk reaction to a vision and being tempted by the dark side, he nearly murdered his nephew, but didn't, and resisted and felt ashamed just for even thinking about it because he realized it wasn't the right thing to do. So contrary to what the haters of this movie think, Luke was not intending on killing Kylo Ren or Ben Solo. And the evidence that there was no intent is the simple fact that Luke read Kylo's mind before pulling out his lightsaber. Plus the fact that his facial expression clearly changes from anger to regret in an instant. And that's just further proof that there was no intent. I mean, do you really honestly think he walked in there thinking, hey, I'm gonna kill my nephew today? No, he didn't. Luke Skywalker is not a murderer, but he isn't perfect either. He makes mistakes. It was a moment of weakness for him. That's why he's relatable. And also, another thing the haters need to stop doing is blindly believing Kylo's version of what happened. Because if you watch Kylo's version of the flashback, it looks like Luke was intending on killing him. But that's not true, because that flashback is simply Kylo Ren's point of view, okay? That version of the flashback is how Kylo remembers, okay? And that's pretty obvious from the way that that version of the flashback is shot and edited, because Luke is shot from a low angle with his eyes wide and like psychotic looking, and Ben is shot from a high angle, making him look small and vulnerable and helpless. And the fact that Luke strikes his lightsaber first, and then Ben pulls out his, blocking him, making it look like Kylo was defending himself. When again, that's not what happened. Just the fact that Kylo is narrating it proves it's not true, because he's just telling Rey how he perceived it. And in the true version of the flashback, Ben pulls out his lightsaber to attack Luke, but Luke blocks him, which proves Luke was defending himself, and that Ben was not defending himself. So therefore, it was Ben, not Luke, who was the cause of the whole thing. Luke was the unintentional cause. It was Luke's action of pulling out the lightsaber and acting before thinking that caused Ben to react by attacking Luke and destroying the hut. But the fact that Luke even contemplated killing Ben is ultimately the reason why he goes into hiding on the island, which was set up in The Force Awakens. because Han told Rey and Finn that one of Luke's apprentices betrayed him, so he unintentionally created a new Darth Vader. Thus, he failed Leia, Han, and the entire galaxy. Basically, that's the whole reason why he rejects Rey's offer to return and refuses to bring the Jedi back, because he feels ashamed and guilty and remorseful for what he did. He goes into hiding for regret, not because of fear or for being a coward. He does it because he clearly has PTSD from what he did. He blames himself for Ben's turn because he ultimately was the cause. Not the main cause, but regardless, his action was what led Kylo to betray him. And just like his father before him, he doesn't want history to repeat itself. He refuses to return because he knows if he does, it'll just make the whole situation worse. Because remember, Anakin wanted to save Padme and was so desperate that he was willing to turn to the dark side to do it because he didn't want the same thing to happen to her that happened to Qui-Gon and his mother. History repeating itself and characters being desperate to prevent history from repeating itself is a huge part of Star Wars as a whole, especially the saga. You know, you could make the argument that another reason why Luke briefly contemplates killing Ben is because he didn't want Ben to kill his family and students. He was trying to prevent history from repeating itself, but it did anyway. Really, the key to understanding why Luke acts the way he does in this movie is to simply look at it from his point of view. View the story from his perspective, okay? If you were in his position, if you nearly had killed a family member just because of one brief, fleeting thought, one knee-jerk reaction to a suspected tragedy, and then that family member turned on you and betrayed you and nearly killed you, you would feel regretful and ashamed of yourself. Really, the number one reason Luke acts the way he does is because he simply views himself as the villain. Because, like I said, he was indirectly responsible for Ben Solo's turn to the dark side. But of course, the haters for this movie don't acknowledge those things for one of two reasons. Either because they expected Luke to remain the same as he was in the original trilogy and not change, which is unrealistic and the opposite of character development, or they're simply blinded by their hatred and bias towards this movie that they just refuse to acknowledge the good things about it. It's really the latter. When they say that Luke would never do something like this, that Luke would never attempt to harm a family member, especially his nephew, that's out of character for him, one thing that they're forgetting is that Luke did the same exact thing before in Return of the Jedi. If you remember, during the climax of Return of the Jedi, when Vader threatens to turn Leia to the dark side, what does Luke do? He loses it and goes so far as to cut off Vader's hand, just like Vader did to him in Empire Strikes Back, and nearly kills Vader because of Vader's threat, and had a knee-jerk reaction to Vader's threat, and briefly was tempted by the dark side to kill his own fucking father. Yet the haters for The Last Jedi do not acknowledge that. They pretend that Luke never attempted to kill Vader, but fact of the matter is, he did, and was being tempted and encouraged by Palpatine to do so. Both moments in both movies are the same, just with different contexts and different outcomes. And another thing Luke did in Return of the Jedi was throw his lightsaber away and reject it, but for different reasons. In Return of the Jedi, he throws the lightsaber away because he rejects Palpatine's request to kill Vader and become his new apprentice. And that's the moment when he officially becomes a Jedi. When he finds the strength within himself to reject Palpatine's temptations and reject the dark side altogether. In Last Jedi, he throws the lightsaber away because the last freaking time he saw it, he found out that his freaking father was his arch enemy, and the last time he used a lightsaber in general, he was tempted to kill his own nephew. So that's the last freaking thing he wants to see or be reminded of, because it's the whole reason he went into hiding and gave up on everyone and everything, because he doesn't want to be reminded of that failure. Again, if you look at the story from Luke's perspective, that's the last thing he wants to see or be reminded of, and that's what he would think, and that's what his mindset would be in that moment when Rey shows up and offers him the lightsaber. In the freaking finale of Mandalorian Season 2, Mando offers the darksaber to Bo-Katan, and she rejects it because she doesn't want to fight Mando, because she knows she has to fight him and defeat him in order to win the darksaber back for herself. Yet, nobody complained about that. Yet, when Luke throws the lightsaber, you complain. But when he shows up in Mandalorian Season 2 and cuts down the Dark Troopers like an overpowered video game character, you have a fanboygasm. Yet at the end of Last Jedi, when he comes back and apologizes to Leia and to Kylo and refuses to fight him and saves everybody's ass, then dies peacefully in self-sacrifice like Obi-Wan and Yoda and Anakin in front of twin sons, you bitch and say that was a dumb way for him to go out. I'm sorry, but if you actually believe that and if you say those things, then you clearly do not understand who Luke Skywalker is. He was never this perfect, overpowered, flawless God that you have made him out to be. He has always been a relatable, flawed, and human guy. I mean, just look at how he started out in A New Hope. He was a whiny kid who loses his aunt and uncle, and then loses the closest person he has to a father, then finds out his father was his arch enemy, and then manages to defeat literal space Satan with the help of his father, who dies in his arms. I'm sorry, no, okay? Luke Skywalker is a flawed, tragic, and dramatic character. He was never perfect. He has problems. That is what a tragic character is, according to Shakespeare. A character that has flaws and doesn't always succeed, and that is what makes us, the audience, relate to them. Therefore, no, Luke was not out of character or ruined in this movie. He's older, but not wiser. In other words, he hasn't learned from his failure until he reunites with Yoda, and Yoda tells him that it is necessary for us to fail in order to grow and to better ourselves. And in the end, Luke does make up for that failure and does fix it by returning and saving Leia and the Resistance and confronting Kylo without fighting him, which is what a true Jedi does. Because as Yoda said in The Empire Strikes Back, a Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense, never for attack. That is character development, not character destruction like it would be if he turned to the dark side like he did in the expanded universe. And finally, contrary to what the haters will make you believe, Mark Hamill did not hate Luke's portrayal in this movie. He said that he initially disagreed with it after he read the script.
I told Brian this, it's no surprise. I said, I just fundamentally disagree with your concept of this character and how you use him.
But then he changed his mind and came around to it.
I've had trouble accepting what he saw for Luke. But again, I mean, I have to say, having seen the movie, I was wrong.
But of course, when he said that, the so-called fans accused him of lying and being bribed by Disney, which is not true. And on top of that, they said that Rian tried to prevent Mark from speaking out and tried to censor him, which also isn't true because Rian Johnson himself admitted that they disagreed about Luke's portrayal. He didn't try to hide it.
Mark, very understandably, wasn't thrilled about some of the choices in the script. The big things being the place that Luke's head is at, the fact that he's not the Luke Skywalker that we knew, and frankly, the fact that he dies at the end.
And finally, another myth about the movie that the haters made up is that Rian and Mark hate each other. Specifically, that Mark hated Rian for changing Luke, which also is not true, because Mark himself confirmed that they are friends, even though they disagreed, and Like I said, Ryan admitted that they disagreed, and just because actors and directors disagree on things does not mean that they hate each other. Creative differences are normal in the filmmaking business. And really quick, before we go into my cons, I just want to discuss my last few pros. Firstly, Kylo Ren. Not only is he my favorite character of this trilogy, but I think he gives his best performance in this movie. Because not only do we get to learn more about him in those flashbacks, but out of any character next to Luke and Rey, he develops and changes drastically in this movie. Because remember, when we first saw him in Force Awakens, he was just a Darth Vader wannabe. And he was so arrogant about that he thought he could be better and more powerful than his grandfather, which Rey calls him out on in the scene when he tortures her in Force Awakens, when she says he's afraid that he'll never live up to Vader. And Snoke clearly sees that when they have their scene together in this movie, when he says, "You're no Vader, you're just a child in a mask," which is true, because as we see in Force Awakens, Kylo has basically constant temper tantrums and is clearly not in control of himself like Vader was. And unlike Vader, he wears his mask to basically make himself appear scary and pretend to be like his grandfather. You know, his mask in Force Awakens basically was a metaphor for his insecurities and his inner conflict between the light side and dark side, like when he said, "Forgive me, I feel it again, the pull to the light," which makes him slightly different than Vader, because Vader tried to ignore the good side of himself. Like, for example, when he said to Ahsoka in the final episode of Star Wars Rebels Season 2, "Anakin Skywalker was weak, I destroyed him." But Kylo clearly just can't do that. You know, he clearly can't let the past die, as he says to Rey. You know, he can't let go of his past because he knows, like it or not, it's a part of him. His identity as the grandson of Anakin Skywalker and the nephew of Luke Skywalker and the freaking son of Han Solo and Princess Leia, that will always, always be a part of him and define him. And how Luke calls him out on this at the end of Last Jedi when he says, "Strike me down in anger and I'll always be with you, just like your father." And other than not being able to turn or to kill Rey, that is the reason why Snoke refuses to complete Kylo's training in this movie. Because Snoke knows damn well that Kylo is still conflicted, and he basically sees him as weak and unworthy of Vader's legacy. And that is what causes Kylo to turn against Snoke in the scene where he smashes his helmet, which is symbolically him letting go of his past and his obsession with becoming the next Vader, and basically him saying, well, if Snoke is not going to help guide me, then I'm going to forge my own path and my own destiny and become my own person. And that is exactly what he means when he says, "Let the past die." He's not breaking the fourth wall and saying, "Fuck the original trilogy and the prequels, this is all about the new stuff," like the haters blindly believe. He's just saying that our pasts can hold us back and prevent us from growing and changing and achieving our goals, which we clearly see with Rey. She is the opposite of Kylo in the sense that she is stuck in her past and can't let it go. Her obsession with finding out who her parents are and whether or not they'll come back for her is one of her flaws as a character, which Kylo points out. He says it's your greatest weakness, and it's a weakness that he exploits and that he knows and understands, and that is one of the reasons why they have such a great and strong connection, especially in this movie. They understand each other because, like I said, they're in similar situations and they're similar characters, just on different sides. And if you want to say that this movie tries to break the fourth wall, then you can say that Rey represents the haters of this movie who can't let go and can't move on from the past and are stuck in it and are clinging to it, while Kylo represents the people who did like this movie and who aren't hesitant and afraid of change and are open-minded. That is what Rian Johnson was trying to say with this movie. He wasn't trying to say, forget the past, it doesn't matter. He was saying that being stuck in our pasts is unhealthy and that we should be open-minded to change because it's natural and inevitable. which we also see with Luke. He changed because he had to, because that's realistic and that's natural. Realistically, we do not remain the same throughout our entire lives. Our personalities and beliefs and thoughts never stay the same, okay? As we grow older, our thoughts and opinions and ideas change and alter with age and with our experiences. Luke changes because his failing Ben was his ultimate failure. Failing his family and the galaxy is what traumatized him and made him change his whole worldview and personality. And to those who say that Luke would not and should not ever fail, you're forgetting that he did fail numerous times in the original trilogy. In A New Hope, he fails to save Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru. In Empire Strikes Back, he fails to lift his X-Wing out of the swamp on Dagobah, and fails to save Han and Leia from Vader, and fails to beat Vader and stand up against him in their lightsaber fight at the end because he abandoned his training to go save Han and Leia. So he was overconfident that he could take on Vader and thought he was prepared, when in reality he wasn't, because Vader clearly overtakes him quickly in that fight. And just the fact that people complained that Luke failed in The Last Jedi, yet they also complain Rey never fails, allegedly, are simply hypocrites. And my final pro is the action. This movie, in my opinion, had so much better action scenes and sequences than The Force Awakens and Rogue One, because to me, the action was just so much better filmed and edited, and story-wise actually had a purpose. The action scenes have a huge impact on the story, most notably the Battle of Dakar in the opening scene, when the entire Resistance bombing fleet is killed and the Resistance is forced to evacuate their base and relocate. That, in my opinion, is such a great space battle, and it's one of my personal favorite Star Wars space battles because it shows the true cost and consequences of war, with all the good guys losing and most of them dying unceremonious deaths. It speaks to the realistic idea that in war, people are going to die randomly, and the fact that sometimes in war, sacrifices have to be made in order to ensure victory, which is why I think Poe's decision to engage the Dreadnought and to take it down was the right thing to do, and I think it was kind of ridiculous for Leia to demote him, because she's not acknowledging his point of view, which is that if he didn't take the Dreadnought out, the entire Resistance would have been wiped out and destroyed just in that opening scene. But that kind of leads into my first con or flaw with the movie, and that is the supporting characters. Firstly, Vice Admiral Holdo. She is such an ineffective leader and such an annoying character. Not just because she doesn't tell Poe and the Resistance the plan, she's just so quiet and keeps to herself and just wants them to stay where they are, in, eventually tells them to abandon ship rather than stand and fight, which I think makes her a coward, just like Poe says, and I think he rightfully so calls her that. But what I also don't like about Holdo is the fact that she treats Poe like a little kid because he got the bombing fleet killed, when, like I said, that wasn't his intention, and she's not hearing him out and listening and acknowledging his point of view. She just wants him to blindly follow her orders, and as we see in the Umbara arc in Clone Wars Season 4, that's wrong. That you should question orders and that you should disobey authority if they're morally unjust, which Fives and Rex do, but Dogma stays blindly loyal. And Holdo just teaches Poe the same lesson that Leia did, which is that our actions can have serious consequences. And we didn't need a whole new character for that. But the number one reason I don't like Holdo is the fact that she just acts so quiet and kind of suspicious, and made me think upon my first viewing of the movie that she was probably a First Order spy, considering after Poe mutinies her, she stuns her captors. And I think had she been secretly a First Order spy, that would have made her character a little bit more interesting and actually gave her more of a purpose. However, I think DJ is a far worse character than Haldo, and I think he was the worst character in the movie. Because just from his first scene, when he meets Finn and Rose in the cell, he looks so shady, and it's so obvious that he's eventually going to betray them. And Benicio del Toro, in my opinion, gives a bad performance because he makes DJ so cartoonish with his whole personality and behaviors, and especially the stupid stutter that he has. He's way too cartoonish for a Star Wars villain. And that's saying something, since General Hux is kind of cartoonish in this movie, but cartoonish in a funny way. Like, especially in the beginning when Poe plays that little phone call prank on him. I actually think that's a funny moment. Same with Luke hitting Rey with a little leaf, making her think that it's the Force. And when Yoda hits Luke in the head with his cane, just like he did to R2 in Empire Strikes Back. Which, contrary to popular belief, also proves that Force ghosts can interact with the living real world. Why? Because Obi-Wan also sat on a log in Return of the Jedi. But there are two moments that I think were supposed to be funny, but I don't think are funny and are more cringy and really awkward to watch. And you know which two moments I'm talking about. Kylo's shirtless scene and the scene where Luke milks the Thal siren. And yeah, I kind of agree with the criticism that that scene should have been cut and his reaction to Han's death should have stayed in, because it's only a couple of seconds and it's an important moment for his character. And my final con is the pacing, mostly the pacing throughout the second act, because a majority of the second act is taken up by Rose and Finn's mission to Canto Bight and to get the Master Codebreaker there, and I completely agree with the criticism that Canto Bight feels like it takes up a majority of not just the second act, but a majority of the movie as a whole. It feels like that entire sequence takes up like half an hour of the movie, even though I timed it and it only takes up 10 minutes and 57 seconds of the movie. It just feels longer, mostly because, in my opinion, it's just the least interesting storyline. Even though I understand why it's there, it's just there to further Finn's character development and for Rose and DJ to challenge his point of view and make him realize that there's more to the war than just the resistance and the First Order. That it really goes much deeper than that, and that there are people on both sides profiting from the war and suffering from it. Those thought-provoking ideas about social class and whether or not there really is a difference between good and evil people of the galaxy, I think is a fascinating idea and thought-provoking, and was a gutsy move for Rian to do, because that's something that we haven't really thought about or seen in Star Wars before this movie. Even though I agree that it made no sense that Finn and Rose didn't free the slave kids and the Fathiers. And speaking of which, I think Rose is the only good and the best supporting character because of the fact that she's just an average person. She's just an everyday mechanic who gets swept into this adventure, and through that she grows and becomes an actual rebel. And the fact that her sister dies in the opening battle gives her a purpose in the story and gives her a motivation to join the fight. And now we come to the part that you've probably been waiting for, and that is the controversy and division surrounding this movie. But before I talk about that, I just want to clarify one thing. Just because I enjoy this movie, and just because I've said all these positive things about it, does not mean I think it's perfect. Because, fact of the matter is, no movie is perfect. And even though The Last Jedi is in my top 5 favorite Star Wars movies, I enjoy the original trilogy and Revenge of the Sith much more. But I can't deny the huge impact and effect that The Last Jedi had on me. The number one reason I love it is because it broke the formula and it pleasantly surprised me. And the fact that it's the only movie I've seen 3 times in the theater. That is how much of an impact it had on me. Now, as for the controversies surrounding the movie, we're only going to discuss the top 3 biggest ones, from most important to least important. Number 1 is the claim that The Last Jedi ruined or destroyed Star Wars as a whole. To me, this is the most annoying and biggest controversy and claim that the haters have made about the movie, because they constantly talk about it and act as though it's a fact. But in reality, it's not. It's just what the haters believe, and it's just their point of view and their opinion. And it's also ironic because people said the exact same thing about the prequels for years. And to branch off of that, another thing that the haters do is harass and attack the filmmakers like Rian Johnson and Kathleen Kennedy for not just this movie but the sequel trilogy as a whole, claiming that Johnson and Kennedy attacked them for not liking the movie or the sequel trilogy, and claimed that Johnson and Kennedy ruined or raped their childhoods, which is hypocritical because they said those same exact fucking things about George Lucas for years after the prequels. I mean, do I really have to play the clip?
George Lucas raped our childhood. George Lucas raped our childhood. George Lucas raped our childhood.
But now that they hate the sequel trilogy, they want George Lucas back, and we're even petitioning for him to direct Episode 9, which is laughably hypocritical and just proves that these haters aren't fans at all. They're just bullies who want attention. And attacking filmmakers just because they made a movie you didn't like is completely childish. And these self-proclaimed fans went so far as to say that they want Kathleen Kennedy and Rian Johnson murdered. And they attacked the actors and actresses like Kelly Marie Tran, who played Rose because she was Asian and a woman. Yeah, that's totally not sexist or racist at all. Sarcasm. They also admitted to altering The Last Jedi's Rotten Tomatoes audience score using bots, and attacked fans who liked The Last Jedi and the sequel trilogy. And the final controversy or thing that the haters of The Last Jedi do is make up information, not just about the movie itself, but pretty much make up information about all new Star Wars content. The two most obvious examples being that, one, Kathleen Kennedy has been fired as the president of Lucasfilm, and two, Rian Johnson's Star Wars trilogy has been cancelled, both of which have been debunked. And two new rumors that they recently made up are that the sequel trilogy is being removed from canon, and that George Lucas is coming back to direct more Star Wars movies and to supposedly save the franchise. And again, there's absolutely no factual evidence for either of those rumors and claims, because there's absolutely no way that Disney is going to remove the sequel trilogy from canon, because firstly, they wouldn't have the power to because they don't make the movies, Lucasfilm does. And secondly, it's made them billions of dollars, and if they do remove it from canon, it'll piss off the fans of those movies, which, contrary to what the haters will make you believe, yes, there are people who like the sequel trilogy, myself included, and that doesn't make us not Star Wars fans, okay? We are fans, we just like something that you don't like. But at least we're civil about it and are constructive with our criticisms. And we also don't make up information and attack the filmmakers. And as for George coming back, there's no way in hell that he will. Why? Because all the hate and harassment he received because of the prequels is the whole reason he sold the franchise to Disney in the first place. He even said, quote, "Why would I make any more when everybody yells at you all the time and says what a terrible person you are?" Close quote. So obviously, the reason George gave it up was because he didn't want to deal with any more of that hate. And I don't blame him. If I was in his position, I would have done exactly the same thing. And before I go, I just want to make one thing crystal clear. This is my opinion. I am entitled to my opinion, just like the people who don't like The Last Jedi are entitled to their opinions. However, there is a big difference between not liking a movie, making up rumors about it, attacking those who made it, and acting like it ruined your life or childhood. Because when you do that, you lose all credibility and don't deserve to call yourself a fan. And like I said before, I myself used to be like that when I was on the prequel hate bandwagon. And that's the thing. Clearly, these haters are riding a bandwagon, And they only hate on Last Jedi and all the new Star Wars content just to appear popular. And because of that, they think they represent the majority of the Star Wars fan base. They are the majority online and on social media, but in real life, they are the vocal minority of the fandom. Because every Star Wars fan I have met in real life is positive and funny and passionate, not a man-child desperate for attention. And just because George, Kathy, Ryan, and JJ made some movies you didn't like doesn't make them evil masterminds, and doesn't make The Last Jedi and the sequel trilogy a crime against humanity. At the end of the day, they're just movies. And so, with all that said, I will give Star Wars Episode 8 The Last Jedi a freaking good, or a solid A. And if you like this video, subscribe to the channel for more. Thanks for watching. Bye.